Welcome to Comfort Crime with Lindsay Sanchez, a cozy mystery podcast where no actual crimes have been committed. Today, we'll continue Murder on Maple Mountain, a cozy mystery with an amateur sleuth, a second chance romance, and a killer who won't stop until they finish what was started 12 years ago. If this is your first time here, welcome, and please start with Episode 1, Chapter 1, or feel free to start with Season 1, the prequel short story, Death at Dogwood Lake. There is a link to both in the show notes, or you can find them at comfortcrime.com. For everyone else, we'll continue to Chapter 18, but first, an update. This week, everything changed. A deep breath, because I have quite the behind-the-scenes story to share with you this week. You know how detectives sometimes have to throw their entire theory out and start fresh? Well, this week I had my very own dramatic detective moment. Except instead of a whiteboard covered in red string, it was me, my laptop, and a growing sense that something just wasn't right. Many of you have asked about the writing process, and for me, this is one of the things I love the most about sharing this journey with you week by week and getting to pull back the curtain just a little bit. Well, this week we might as well blow up the curtain, because here's the thing. From day one, I've told you that while I don't know every twist and turn, I do know two things: who done it and why they done it. That's been my anchor, my North Star, my security blanket, until this week. And that's when the why stopped feeling right. For the last several chapters, I kept telling myself I'd weave in a few extra clues about the killer's motivation, just work them in naturally, let them breathe. But every single time I tried, something just felt off. It was kind of like trying to force the puzzle piece that looks like it should fit but just doesn't. So I did what anyone would do. I put it off. I told myself I'd work it into the next chapter. Again and again and again, and this week was the reckoning. There were no more next chapters to hide behind. We are staring down the barrel of a proverbial gun, and we need to know definitively who is on the other end of it and why they pulled the trigger. Narratively speaking, of course. So I did the scary thing and scrapped the original motivation and started over. I did everything I could think of to try and clear my mind and let the inspiration come. I took long walks and hot showers. I listened to previous episodes and chatted with my critique partner. And you know what? A new why finally clicked into place, and I am so much more in love with this story now than I was a week ago. So thank you all for your patience this week, and fingers crossed that you are going to love the new ending as much as I do. And when everything's all said and done, if you want to know what the original ending was going to be, you can shoot me an email and I'll let you know all the dirty details. Last time, between Eric's warnings and her own suspicions, Georgia had a terrible feeling that what she'd feared all along was coming true. Rose was in danger. When she and her friends found Rose's TV off, house empty, and cat left out in the cold, they knew their worries weren't just in their imaginations. Murder on Maple Mountain, Chapter 18. Standing in the dark street, Georgia hugged her coat to her chest. Logically, she knew what had just happened. She couldn't even blink without seeing flashes of Rose and her mangled body lying in the dirty snow. The ambulance had long since disappeared down the mountain, but she and Jake stood there, side by side in silence, sharp wind whistling between them. He moved closer and lifted his arm, like he was going to put it around her. He stopped, letting it hang for a second in midair, then let it drop again, like he had on the deck. Like he still wanted to give her that hug, but just didn't know if she wanted it, and was too afraid to ask. Georgia unfolded her arms and held out her hand, sticking it in the space between them. An offering, a promise. No matter what they were or what had happened, they were friends. No matter their history, they were friends. He took her hand, wrapping his big, warm fingers around her smaller, frozen ones. He held onto her hand like the Titanic was sinking, and she was the only thing keeping him afloat. His fingers found their way between hers, lacing them together, like if he ever let go, he might drown. They stood there, hand in hand, staring down the face of the pitch-black mountain, until Jake spoke. "Georgia?" His voice was low, the beginnings of tears in her name. She wasn't ready for this moment to end, to accept what had just happened. She wasn't ready to decide which emotion would win, her fury at whoever had hurt Rose, or her gratitude that the woman was still alive, that they'd found her in time. The two warred within her until fury won. "We have to find them," she said. "It's like Lisa said, we have to find them and make them pay." Georgia freed her hand from Jake's grip and rummaged in Sienna's coat pocket for the letter that started all of this. Without that letter, Ivy might not be dead. Without it, Rose might not be on her way to the hospital. As Georgia stood in the road, guilt slithered over her. They had found Rose, but it hadn't been in time to save her. She should have listened to Eric when she'd had the chance. She tore the letter out of the pocket and ripped it open, shredding the envelope to get to the information inside, to get to the killer. "You found it." Jake watched over her shoulder as she unfolded the paper. "What is it?" he whispered, squinting closer. "It's Tom Harding's autopsy." She searched the page, looking for more information, for anything that would make sense of why this paper had led to the death of two people and the hospitalization of their friend. "Oh my gosh." Georgia pointed out the cause of death to Jake. "But here, look, it says there was fluid in his lungs." He pointed to another line on the report. "But nowhere does it say blunt force trauma." "So Eric didn't accidentally kill Tom?" "Eric didn't kill Tom," Georgia agreed. 12 years ago, when Eric punched his no-good stepdad in the face, that's all it was, a punch in the face. If this meant what she thought it meant, then someone had murdered Tom and let Eric take the fall. Someone had hidden this report on purpose. There was only one person who could have done that. "I know who the killer is." "Are you sure?" "No," she said. It seemed pretty clear, but as enthusiastic as she'd once been about solving crimes, she'd never been a professional. "But I know who can tell us more." She started to run, careful to stick to the salted lanes, and checked over her shoulder to make sure Jake was following. "Call Lisa," she yelled to him. Tell her not to trust anybody. I mean anybody. Until we figure this out, tell her not to leave Rose's side. Minutes later, she stopped at Frank's door and knocked, bending over with her hands on her knees to catch her breath. No answer. "He's probably asleep," Jake said when he caught up, whispering as if just talking could wake him. Georgia rang the doorbell, then tried the handle. Locked. "How are you so sure Frank will be able to help?" "His lab is the one that ran the samples, the one he worked for before he moved here and joined Lisa's bakery." Georgia straightened, still breathing deeply, but upright. "How do you know?" He still wasn't convinced. "Because I've seen that logo before. It was on the package of test strips Frank used to test the cake." Georgia knocked again, pounding on the door with her fist. "I didn't think anything of it at the time, but he might be the one that ran Tom's samples." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Or at least he'll have done something similar. Did you get a hold of Lisa?" No answer. He shook his head. Frank opened the door, his white hair mussed and his eyes heavy, looking like he'd already been asleep for the night. "What's going on?" He turned on the porch light and wrapped his bathrobe more tightly around his thin frame. "Back when you worked as a scientist in the lab, did you ever process samples from dead bodies?" He stepped back and opened his eyes wider, seeming to reassess the situation. "I mean for autopsies," Georgia reassured him. "What's all this about?" He shook his head but opened the door wider, looking over Georgia as if Jake would be more reasonable. "I barely know myself." Jake shut the door behind them. "Can you help us read this autopsy report?" Georgia pulled out the folded paper from her pocket. "Reports aren't hard to read. They've already been interpreted for you." Frank searched his pockets for his reading glasses, pulled them out, and perched them on his nose, holding out his hand for the piece of paper. Georgia hesitated, not wanting to let go. This was the proof, the only proof they had that Eric hadn't killed Tom. But it still didn't prove who did. That's why Rose had stolen it. That's why Eric had been looking for it. They didn't want the killer to know they knew. Georgia held out the piece of paper so Frank could see it, but she kept her thumb over Tom Harding's name. "Oh dear." Frank scanned the document once, twice, 3 times. If he noticed that Georgia was conspicuously still hanging on to the corner, he didn't say anything. She could almost see his scientific brain turning on, waking up. His eyes brightened. He looked younger, like a past version of himself come back to life. "It's poison, isn't it?" she asked. "Cyanide." "But it says there was fluid in the lungs," Jake jumped in. "So maybe he had been poisoned, but the drowning killed him?" "It's common to have fluid in the lungs with an acute cyanide poisoning, and the medical examiner states quite clearly that's the cause of death, the cyanide." Frank dismissed Jake's theory and was about to start on the 4th scan of the autopsy report when he paused. "Where did you get this?" Instead of searching the document again, he searched Georgia's face. "The date doesn't match, but if it did, it could have been." He shook his head. "But where did you get this?" Georgia knew what he was thinking. Ivy had died of cyanide. They were sure of it, but because of the rushed funeral and lack of suspicion, They didn't have an autopsy for her. I'll tell you if you tell me what this means. You can see what it means. We think we can, Georgia agreed, but we've jumped to conclusions in the past. Frank wavered for a second, like Georgia might be toying with him. He took off his glasses with one hand and rubbed his eyes with the other. This poor soul wasn't just poisoned. They were murdered with cyanide. That's why... He stopped. I thought... He paused again, unable to finish the sentence. You thought it was Ivy's. Georgia put her hand on the old man's shoulder. I'm sorry, Frank. Jake stepped closer. I'm sorry to wake you up and drag you into this. We just need to be sure. That's my lab's logo down there. I'm quite sure. I would have processed, any number of things. Skin tissue or stomach tissue, perhaps some blood. It's quite certain this person died from cyanide. You can tell by the milligrams per liter. The results are conclusive. He looked up. Now tell me. Frank tapped his finger gently on George's thumb, the one that was hiding the poor soul's name. Tell me. He wiggled the paper out of her grasp till 2 words were clear. Thomas Harding? He drew his eyebrows together in concern or anger. Does Rose know? She knows. Georgia took their report back, folding it and gently putting it in her jeans pocket. She's the one who stole this from you. She did what? Jake asked at the same time as Frank said, I beg your pardon. I think she and Eric have known for a long time that he wasn't the one who killed Tom. They've been searching for proof. But they have it. Jake pointed to the report. Why would they hide it? This proves Jake's punch didn't kill Tom. It doesn't prove who did. I know who killed Tom Harding. Who? Both men looked at her with wide eyes. He's the only one who could have. The only one who had anything to gain from killing him. Georgia walked back and forth across Frank's tiny tiled entry. Doug Barlow. He just didn't know that Eric would come up the mountain that day. That's why they met at the lake. Jake caught on. It wasn't to hide from my dad and Eric like they told him. It was just so they could poison him. The pieces fit. Georgia shook her head, but we don't have proof, just like Rose and Eric. And it still doesn't answer who killed Doug Barlow, Frank added. And Ivy. With this, Georgia pointed to the report in her back pocket. That's easy, but we still don't have proof. Was there something that day at the lake? Something we missed? Jake put his hands to his head like he was holding it together, as if the extra support would help him remember a detail that everyone else had missed 12 years ago. No, Georgia kept pacing. But there was something missing. Not that day at the lake. After. It was this report. Who buried it? There was only one person who could have. The lead officer on the case of Tom Harding's death. Georgia pulled out her phone and called her dad. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a mystery-loving friend or consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast player. Most of all, thank you so much for being here today. I loved it, and I'm already excited for next week.